Which teams are the clear winners of the transfer portal season, and which teams have a lot of work to do to avoid a disastrous year in 2024-25?
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, folks? Happy Friday. Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, a daily national college hoop show, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We are your co-hosts. I'm Andy Patton. He is Isaac Shade over there, and you are joining us at the place to get your college basketball content every single day. Yes, not just November through March, folks. We are with you every single day here on the Locked On College Basketball Podcast. I want to thank all of you who have made this show your first listen or your first watch of the day, and shout out to those everyday listeners who are rocking with us each and every day. A reminder to all of you out there, you can listen to the show ad-free on Amazon Music if you have not done so yet. Fantastic place to check out the show. Today's episode of Locked On College Basketball is brought to you by Monopoly Go. Folks, I have a competitive side, and it is a big fan of Monopoly Go, the mobile hit twist on classic Monopoly. So join your friends and download Monopoly Go now free on the App Store or Google Play Store. Well, Isaac, the transfer portal is closed, and there are still 16, 17, 1,800 or so players out there who have yet to commit. But with the transfer portal closing, we know that no more players are going to enter into the portal. Rosters are set with the players that they have right now. So what we want to do on today's show is take a look at which teams at this point in early May are the transfer portal winners, the transfer portal losers, and maybe the teams that are just not quite set yet. A couple teams that are right in the middle where we've seen some good things, we've seen some not so good things. They still got some work to do. Again, a lot of rosters out there are very far from being complete. Some rosters out there basically didn't change. That's what makes college basketball, especially in the modern era, so unbelievably chaotic. Isaac, I'm going to start with you. What is a team that stands out to you as a team that has really won this first part of the college basketball offseason with the transfer portal closing?
Andy, I'm really glad to mention this team because this is one of those teams that college basketball is better when this team is good. Mm-hmm. And that's the Michigan Wolverines. And so, look, I just want to mention a bunch of guys they brought in and then some that they lost that, it's like, I don't know. Mm-hmm. But to me, the biggest win of the transfer portal has been Dusty May coming in, right? Like, that's massive for them. And the fact that so many thought that he might wind up at Indiana, his alma mater, but nah, he's at a conference rival. And so I don't know. We'll see. Because Indiana, they're out there too, Andy. We'll have to see what they are this year. Mike, coach, has done some good stuff for himself there. But what Michigan has brought in addition to a new head coach, I think is a good crop of talent, Andy, to really help do it. And I'm just strictly talking transfer portal here. Sam Walters from Alabama, I think he's a big shooter. I love his size. I love his shot. I love what he brings to the table. What do you want in basketball? Guys that can hit from outside, and he brings that. Roddy Gale from Ohio State, I've always liked him. Trey Donaldson from Auburn, I'd like to see some growth there, but I think he's got good talent. Coach May is able to bring Vlad Golden up with him. That just happened this week. But also they get in another big in Danny Wolf from Yale, who I'm sure everyone saw in the tournament and liked. And you got these two bigs, and it's like, does that work? Well, yeah, I think they have a different enough game that it fits together. And maybe the guy that's off the radar a little bit more that I like is Reuben Jones from North Texas. Really curious to see how he translates to the Michigan level. And then in terms of like what is offset there, Terrace Reed obviously is out the door to UConn. I think that is a loss. But Andy, I think offset by those other two bigs that come in. Doug McDaniel, I think, is probably the biggest loss to me. He's out the door to Kansas State, and Terrence Williams to USC. And the other person that's out is the reason Dusty May's in is Juwan Howard. And I hate to say it, Andy, but it was time to make that move.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, you mentioned Indiana on there, and I think I have them as an honorable mention as a portal winner, only because I'm not quite sure how all the pieces are going to fit together for Mike Woodson's team. But I do think that if things go well for Indiana, they're probably not going to feel the sting as much. of losing Dusty May, but certainly if all these pieces don't quite line up together and Michigan kind of moves past Indiana in the Big Ten standings, I think we're going to hear a lot of people in Bloomington who are not particularly happy that this team didn't make a push at Dusty May when they had the opportunity to. Yeah. I'm going to go over to the Big 12 with my portal winner, and I'm taking Kansas, and we've talked about Kansas a handful of times on the show already, and I kind of took it from a perspective with both the teams that I have as my winners, from the perspective of not as much talent acquired, although in Kansas's case, there's quite a bit of it, but not losing talent either. And Kansas is one of the very few teams in college basketball, period, in college basketball that did not lose a player to the transfer portal. None. Nobody from that Kansas roster entered the transfer portal. Obviously, they've lost guys to the NBA draft, like Johnny Furphy and Kevin McCullough, but they don't lose anybody else. Hunter Dickinson comes back, DeJuan Harris comes back, KJ Adams comes back. But then when you actually look at the transfer portal aspect of it all, they bring in one of the absolute, no doubt, best scoring players in the entire transfer portal in AJ Storr, an incredibly talented wing coming in from Wisconsin, going to replace Kevin McCullough. Probably not quite as good defensively and just from a versatility perspective, but he is a really, really good scorer. And then you had a trio of other guard wing types to give this team so much more depth than they had last year. They had Rylan Griffen from Alabama. They had Riley Kugel from Florida. I know he disappointed a little bit last year at Florida, but that's still a really, really talented kid. And then you also had Zeke Mayo from South Dakota State, one of the better mid-major wings that was available. They snapped him up early in the portal season. We heard recently that they're in contact with Jordan Ivy Curry, a transfer out of UT San Antonio, which would be another tremendous. I'm not sure how they'd play all these guys if they brought Ivy Curry in, but this team didn't have enough depth. This team's, whether they get Ivy Curry or not, already got way, way more depth than last year's team. I really like what Kansas has done this offseason.
Yeah, Andy, and I think you're spot on with that. Being a transfer portal winner is not always about who did you bring in. And as you so deftly pointed out there, it's about who you kept. And Kansas, especially, let's remember back, they lost a ton in the transfer portal last year. And so kudos to Coach Bill Self for getting this put back together. You and I have said it, but they ain't losing a bunch of Big 12 games like they did last year. Andy, my other team that I want to shout out as a winner, and how fun is this to get to say? The ACC powerhouse, Cal Golden Bears, right? But seriously, Cal moving to the ACC, and I think they're putting themselves in better shape than they've been in a while. Not that I think they're going to compete or contend in the ACC this year, if I'm being honest, but relative to expectation, I think they've got a couple good pieces. The two main ones that stick out to me are they get a transfer from the other really smart Northern California team from the Pac-12. Andrej Stojakovic comes over from Stanford. And this is a guy who his final three were Cal, Kentucky, and North Carolina. Yeah. And he picks Cal. Now, part of that is the pieces at those other schools. Sure, fine, whatever. But he chooses Cal. And so you love that. Mady Sissoko is coming over from Michigan State. He's a guy that's just, Andy, I mean, is it harsh of me to say he's just never lived up to expectations?
Yeah, I don't think so.
Yeah. And maybe, sometimes it's just you need a new landing spot, and that helps out. So I'm really curious to see what Sissoko can do. And then just some of the other pieces. I mean, they bring in a lot. Josh Ola-Joseph from Minnesota, Rydas Petritis. That's how I always say his name, and I hope it's right because I love the rhyme. From Air Force, Lee Dort from Vandy, Christian Tucker from UT San Antonio, BJ Omot from North Dakota, and DJ Campbell from Western Carolina. So, Andy, what I like about that, it's a lot, but you just need like one or two of those guys to really hit, and then you're in good shape. Obviously, Devin Askew is out the door to Long Beach State, and what a weird career progression from him, who started at Kentucky and then now has gone from Cal to Long Beach State. So I don't know, but just another person that really hasn't lived up to what we thought he might be able to be.
I'm a big believer in Mark Madsen as a head coach, so I think things are definitely going to turn around for the Golden Bears, and I like this class coming in. They got a lot of guys who graduated, so they got a lot of spots to fill, but this is a really solid group of guys joining that team in Berkeley. My second team here is Gonzaga, and Gonzaga, far and away among the teams we're talking about of winners, has the least transfer portal additions coming in. They only have one player currently committed to join their team as a transfer. That's Michael Ajayi coming over from Pepperdine. Now he's very good, 6'7" wing, averaged 17 and 10 in his first year of Division I basketball last year for the Waves. He was a junior college guy before that. A really nice capable Anton Watson replacement, probably not as good defensively, but I think more versatile offensively, better three-point shooter. But the main thing for Gonzaga is what I talked about with Kansas. They didn't really lose anybody. They lost a couple of fringe rotation players. Luka Krajinovic entered the transfer portal. Pavle Stosic entered the transfer portal. Both those guys were really late additions to Gonzaga's freshman class last year, kind of desperation grabs to bring in some guys to fill out some roster spots. So it's not a huge loss for Gonzaga. Meanwhile, they not only get Michael Ajayi in to replace Anton Watson, they effectively get Steele Venters in as a transfer. I know it doesn't officially count, but it sort of counts. He didn't play last year with an ACL injury after committing to Gonzaga. This is the guy who I will repeat this every time I bring him up, not because I think that it's a fair comparison, but Dalton Knecht did not win Big Sky Player of the Year at Northern Colorado. Steele Venters was the Big Sky Player of the Year at Eastern Washington. Does that mean he's going to have the same level of impact as Knecht?
Yes,
probably
absolutely.
Not. Probably not. But it is worth acknowledging that that is a good conference, and he is a very good player who's going to join Gonzaga this year. They are also currently, as we are recording this right now, hosting Arkansas transfer Caliph Battle on a visit. Battle dropped 42 points against Missouri last year, finished his last 7 games in a Hogs uniform, averaging 29.5 points per game. If Gonzaga, it's between Gonzaga and Villanova right now. If they were to land Battle as their third guard, I think that everybody else in the country, not just us, is going to be talking about Gonzaga as one of the biggest winners out of the transfer portal season.
Woo! I love all these teams, folks. We'd like to hear who you think are the biggest portal winners. Who else is it outside of who we've already named? Let us know. Hop in, find us on the Locked On College Basketball Discord, Twitter, wherever it is. We'd love to hear from you. Now, losing your head coach, Andy, we got to recognize almost always leads to a mass exodus of talent, as is going to be the case with a couple of these teams we talk about here in a second. But losing your coach and moving down to a mid-major conference, yikes, that's a tough pill to swallow. We got more on that in just a second. Right after I tell you about eBay Motors, passion, drive, patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers to roof racks, exhaust kits to LED headlights and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. We're talking portal winners and losers and we'll wait and seers here on today's Friday episode of the show. Andy, we've just talked about the winners. Who's on the other side? Who are the guys that are like, oh boy, I'm glad the portal door is shut? Where are you going first?
I think we got to start with, if we're going to have Gonzaga be one of the winners, we got to take the team that's about 75 miles south of Spokane in Pullman, Washington. Now, conference opponent, the Washington State Cougars. And look, Wazoo was not dealt a good hand here. I don't blame Coach Kyle Smith for leaving. He had already coached in the WCC as the head coach at San Francisco, took that job at Washington, led them to a 7th seed this past year in the NCAA tournament. A tremendous, tremendous season for the Cougars. Nobody expected them to finish in the top 5 of the Pac-12, and they finished second. Just a really, really great year from Wazoo. But after the season, the Pac-12 disbands. Obviously, 10 of the Pac-12 schools have found new homes. Washington State and Oregon State are stuck in this weird middle ground. They are joining the WCC for the next 2 years. A good basketball conference. Do not get it twisted. But it is not the same as the Pac-12, and I have to imagine that these two programs are not feeling like they can blow a bunch of money on NIL right now when they don't really have any secure future. So Kyle Smith says, all right, I'm good. I'm going to go take the head coaching job at Stanford. He's going from the WCC to the ACC by going from Wazoo to Stanford, which is just totally normal and what we would expect to be saying right now. But Wazoo loses 12 players to the portal and 1 player to graduation. That's it. That's your scholarship team gone. A team that was a 7 seed last year that had a lot of camaraderie, that was a fun group to watch, gone. Everybody's gone. And new coach David Riley, who'd been the head coach at Eastern Washington, he is a good coach, but so far as we're recording this right now, the only 3 additions that Washington State has made from the transfer portal are all players following Coach Riley from Eastern Washington. Dane Erickstrup, Lawan Watts, and Ethan Price. And look, these guys are good, and all of them are capable of playing in the WCC unquestionably. But when you lose an entire roster that was a 7 seed in the Pac-12, and all you have is 3 Big Sky players who are now going to play in the WCC, it's pretty hard to not call that a loss for this team and this program. I feel for them. I'm gutted for them because this is not how this should have gone for them. On a similar story, Oregon State's women's basketball team went to the Elite Eight last year, was a phenomenal team, and at the end of the year, everybody entered the transfer portal because they're moving to the WCC. It's just an unfortunate situation and kind of a sad one to lead with here when talking about portal losers, but it's hard to not consider Washington State from where they were last year to where they are right now, one of the biggest losers in all of college basketball.
And to that point, I guess we could say loser in general in college sports, Pac-12, man. It's a bummer. I'm still just like, it sucks, Andy. It sucks, man, that the Pac-12 is gone. My loser is kind of in a similar situation where they've lost a lot. A year after keeping together just about everyone from a Final Four run, FAU, unfortunately, has lost all 5 starters and the head coach from that Final Four team, despite the fact that they had all 5 of those Final Four starters and their head coach back the year after. And so let's just take a moment and celebrate that, what FAU did. And you and I talked about it a couple times this year, Andy. The fact that we even brought up FAU multiple times throughout this season when they would lose a game or something is a credit to them making themselves nationally relevant. But now, Brian Greenlee, out of eligibility, and the other 4 starters are now elsewhere. Dusty May, as we already said, gone to Michigan. Vlad Golden followed him up there. But also John L. Davis, who many have looked at as the number 1 player in the transfer portal, has committed to Arkansas, and Coach Cal. Elijah Martin, probably their most athletic and electric player, is at Florida. He's staying in state, but he's moving to the SEC. And then Nick Boyd is, interestingly enough, going to the team that they lost to in the Final Four, San Diego State. So, and look, and I know FAU's got a couple other guys coming in. Caleb Glenn from Louisville, Leland Walker, EKU, Darius Staten McCray from Samford. Shout out to Samford, who, actually, speaking of transfer portal losers, yikes. Acor out the door. But Andy, I know they get some others in, but there's just no replacing that group for FAU. So really curious to see what life is like in the new era.
Yeah, and I think at least for FAU, they were able to parlay this run of success to a move to the AAC. I don't know if that would have happened otherwise. They are in a better conference. Hopefully that helps them be able to sustain some success. But yeah, certainly hard to see your entire starting lineup over the last 2 years all disappear as well as your head coach in one off season. Isaac, I'm going to move up to the Big Ten and talk about the Badgers of Wisconsin, a team that definitely disappointed at the end of the season. They were looking at points in the year like a potential, like kind of dark horse candidate to be one of the last 1 seeds, and then they fall completely off the map. Still, of course, make the tournament, still end up getting a 5 seed, but really rough end of the year. And then things have just not gotten better since the season ended. They've had 7 players enter the transfer portal. We already mentioned one of them, an AJ Storr, perhaps the best overall scorer available at any time during this offseason. He goes to Kansas. They lose their starting point guard over the last 3 years. Guy who started over 100 games in the Big Ten, and Chucky Hepburn. He heads over to Louisville to go with Pat Kelsey, the new coach over there. They lose their backup guard, Connor Esigian. He goes to Nebraska. Gus Yalden, a 4-star freshman who redshirted last year, he goes to Seton Hall. Just a lot of loss of talent for Greg Gard's team at Wisconsin. They've made some additions, but the 2 players they've brought in are both currently outside the top 500 of Evan Miyakawa's transfer portal rankings. They're both mid-major guys, Cameron Hunter from Central Arkansas, Xavier Amos from Northern Illinois. And I think these guys are both good, and I don't think they're going to ultimately be like not in the top 500 of players who transferred this past year, but it's not a great class and it's certainly not, even if it was a great class, it's really hard to replace a 3-year starting point guard in Chucky Hepburn and an all-around versatile scorer in AJ Storr. So even if they make some more moves, which I'm certain that they will, this has been a really rough month or so for the Wisconsin Badgers.
Andy, my final transfer portal loser also loses 2 very key players and a handful of others. And that's, I'm going to stay in the state of Florida, and that's the Miami Hurricanes. Because the big news that happened, unfortunately, on the same day on April 25th was Miami losing both Norchad Omier and Wooga Poplar. This is a tough blow for Coach L and his team. Look, if I'm him, I'm kind of, is it maybe time to hang it up at that point with where he's at, man? I just hate this for them, because after their own great run to the Final Four this year I'm still shook that they didn't do stuff this year with what they had. But they lose those guys and they're not committed yet, but along with Bensley Joseph, who's going to Providence, Michael Nwoko off to Mississippi State, AJ Casey to St. Louis, and then Christian Watson, to Southern Miss. Now, Andy, the good news is Miami does get a couple guys in. Lynn Kidd comes over from Virginia Tech, a really productive 6'10" center. Brandon Johnson from East Carolina, Jalen Blackman comes in as well. And they've got some good freshmen coming, headlined by Jalil Bethea, who I'm really excited to see at the collegiate level. So, Andy, losing guys of Omier and Poplar status, you just can't replace that.
Well, Isaac, Baylor made a big splash when they brought in Jeremy Roach out of Duke, but without any further additions, they're going to fall right now into our, quote, too early to call, end quote, category. More on that in just a second. All right, game off. We got to pause right here to talk about Monopoly Go. I know what you're saying, flag on the play. You already talked about that, but there is so much good stuff in this game. In Monopoly Go, folks, you can team up with your friends for timed tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome the prizes are that you unlock. And there is so many different things you can get, like unique stickers. You can trade with your friends to complete albums for big prizes, cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with, hilarious emojis for taunting your friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every single day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton include their own unique mini games like digging for treasure or a robot pachinko machine. And there's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover for Monopoly Go. So get off the bench and go download it free on Google Play or the Apple App Store. Game on. All right, Isaac, we talked winners, we talked losers, but it's May 2nd, or it's May 3rd, as many of you are listening to this, and there's still months and months and months where players who are in the transfer portal, who've already made that decision, have until they decide to go somewhere else. So most of these teams are not finalized. And so we still have a lot of teams that we want to focus on here in particular that maybe they've made some good moves. Maybe they've made one good move, but they haven't made the rest of the moves yet. And we're kind of trying to figure out, are they going to end up being a winner or a loser when all is said and done in September when these rosters are finalized? And I want to start with the team in the Big 12, the Baylor Bears, because they made a huge addition when they inked Jeremy Roach, pulled him from Duke. He'd been there for many years, one of the last remaining players of the Mike Krzyzewski era, and they bring him over to Waco, Texas. This is a tremendous addition. Scott Drew has done masterful things with transfer portal guards, dating back to their national championship in 2021 all the way through even this past year with Ray J. Dennis from Toledo. Like, this team has done a tremendous job of adding talent via the transfer portal, particularly in the backcourt. But they have struck out on adding some key pieces in the front court over the last few years. And in particular, this year, they had Jonas Adu on campus. It seemed to all accounts like it was a sure thing, like they were going to get Jeremy Roach from Duke and Jonas Adu from from Tennessee. And then Jonas Adu doesn't commit. He leaves Baylor. He ends up committing to Arkansas. He's going to be teaming up with John L. Davis and John Calipari's new offense over there. And now we look at Baylor, and they've had 4 players enter the transfer portal, only 1 player coming in Jeremy Roach. And it's like, this is a good roster still. They still have some talented pieces returning from last year. They're still bringing in VJ Edgecombe, who is an incredibly extraordinary fun freshman who's going to be fantastic to watch next year. But at the end of the day, it's kind of like, well, we're not exactly sure where this Baylor team is. And I think a big part of this is the fact that they lost their key recruiter. Alvin Brooks was kind of their main recruiting coach, and he followed Mark Pope to Lexington, or I guess he went with Mark Pope to Lexington. He did not follow Scott Drew to Lexington because Scott Drew said, no, I'm good. I'm going to stay here. And Brooks said, actually, I think I might go. I think I might go over there. And he's a tremendous recruiter. So that's a great win for Mark Pope in Kentucky. But if you're Baylor right now, the pickings for dynamic front court players are a little bit slimmer. You missed out on the biggest target for Jonas Adu. You still made a huge addition in Jeremy Roach. You still got a great freshman class coming in, but the pieces aren't quite done for the Baylor Bears. And if they don't make any other big moves, this probably won't be considered a super successful offseason, but they're only maybe 1-2 decent pieces away from us being like, okay, Baylor's back in the mix as a national championship contender.
Yeah. And Andy, it's weird because I really thought like that weekend that Adu was there in Waco, it really sounded like it was going to be a done deal like that weekend. And so I'm shocked that they didn't get him. It's also tough because of that great recruiting class. Noah Boyed has asked out of his NLI, and he's a 7-footer, right? So he could have been coming in to fill some of that role. But thankfully, as you said, Edgecombe's coming in. I really like Jason Asamoah, who's part of that class, as well as Rob Wright, who's coming from Montverde. And Asamoah's coming from Hillcrest Prep. So they've both played at high levels. Andy, the thing is, now you got to go find a big. But as you're talking about, it's like, who's left? There's a couple guys that have come in. Maybe they get in on Acor from Stanford, we mentioned earlier. There's some good names out there. And I think that's the thing. I like. What about like a JT Toppin, from New Mexico? There's just some guys, and I'm just curious to see who it's going to be. But Andy, let's switch to another team that's in our too early to call category, which is triggering me a little bit because November's only a few short months away now on too early to call. So we'll see what happens there on election night.
Yeah.
But is a team you mentioned in conjunction there with Baylor, and that's Arkansas, who did ultimately land Jonas Adu. As we know, everyone left. I mean, it was just all hands on deck, or all hands off deck, I guess, really, because they were all gone. Here comes Coach Cal riding on a white stallion in the middle of the night. And Andy, they've just been making moves out here. They land Jonas Adu. They get John L. Davis earlier this week, which we talked about earlier, as many saw him as the number one transfer portal addition, and many saw Adu as the number one big man addition. And so you have that in the backcourt and the front court. There's a combination, not to mention Zvonimir Ivisic right there in the front court with Adu as well. You got some ability for them, to spell each other, not to mention that Cal brings in multiple of his freshmen, Carter Knox, Billy Richmond, Boogie Fland. Boy, I like Boogie Fland. And Andy, secretly out of nowhere, we find out on Wednesday that Adu Thiero was there visiting.
Yeah.
Now, I've heard some potential rumors that was more of he doesn't really want to go, but his parents are wanting him to. So we'll see what happens there. But all that to say, Arkansas's in on dudes. Can they get DJ Wagner to come with them? There's opportunity there in Fayetteville. We know the money's there. And so I think this is a great team to have in this too early to call category.
Last team that I want to talk about is Duke. And it's crazy to end a show talking about Duke. Typically, we're talking about Duke at the top of most shows, but they're just in an interesting spot. Obviously, they lost Jeremy Roach. We mentioned that when we talked about Baylor. They lost players to the NBA draft. They're no longer going to have Jared McCain. They're no longer going to have Kyle Filipowski. They lost 7 total players to the transfer portal, Jeremy Roach being the biggest name, but they also lost Mark Mitchell, who's committed to join Dennis Gates' team at Mizzou. We could have mentioned Dennis Gates and Mizzou as a winner. They have had a really successful transfer portal season. We'll see how well that translates onto the court. But the rest of the team players that they lost were role guys who didn't play much, and who I think a lot of them probably felt like the freshman class that's coming in was going to keep those players. Was TJ Power ever going to be a significant rotation player for this team? It's hard to know. So it's like, if Duke's losing players to the transfer portal, which is unusual for this program, it hasn't really happened much. But if those players are feeling like the freshmen who are coming in are better than them, then it's like, how much of that is an actual loss for Duke? So they're kind of a bit of a different spot of, I don't know necessarily that they need to make a bunch more big moves. It's more of like, were they right that this freshman class is going to come in and be good enough? We know Cooper Flagg could be fantastic. Like, we're not really concerned about Cooper Flagg. And what I like about what John Shire is doing is, they look at the roster and they got Cooper Flagg coming in. They have Tyrese Proctor coming back. They have a couple of pieces, and they're like, let's build around Cooper Flagg. So they bring in Mason Gillis, who's a tremendous role player. He's really good at doing what he does. He's not a guy who needs the ball in his hands a whole bunch to score. They bring in Malik Brown, who's a very efficient scorer from Syracuse, but again, not a guy who's very ball dominant. No. So you still have the pieces that work kind of building around a roster with Cooper Flagg and the rest of this tremendous freshman class coming in. So Duke may not need to do a whole lot more to be really good next year, but when you lose 7 players to the transfer portal, you only bring 2 in. You're certainly in a spot where it's like, how confident should we feel about this Blue Devils team? Like, it's certainly not as inspiring as they would have been if they'd kept Roach, if they'd kept Mark Mitchell. But this might work out even better for John Shire's club if they can find a few more pieces that kind of fit what they need around Cooper Flagg and company.
Yeah, I'm with you, Andy. I think that both Mason Gillis and Malik Brown are really good complementary pieces, particularly with Brown. I love his two-way game. Like, that defense that he brought for Syracuse last year was really, really good. One thing that I would have liked to have seen happen for Duke is, especially with Jared McCain out the door, is if Kobe Brea had been in the portal like 2 weeks earlier, I wonder if he's a Duke Blue Devil today instead of a Kentucky Wildcat. I just, there's a lot there. And so I'm interested for that story to come out of, like, why did that visit ultimately get canceled? Was it because of Kentucky? Was it because Duke said no? Was it he said no? Because at the time it was like, oh, it's because he's at UConn and he's going to go be a Husky. And then they get Aiden Mahaney and that doesn't happen. So it's just, I'm really curious to see what the butterfly effect was with all this and where Duke ultimately lands. Andy, fun show. Love that the transfer portal's over, but hate that the transfer portal's over all at the same time. But there's still lots of guys out there, still lots of landing spots. So we're going to be keeping you up to date with all of that. And I'm sure we'll have a boatload more to talk about on Monday. Keep your eye this weekend, folks, on more names trickling out where the paperwork just might not have been done yet as of the time we record this, that even though the portal door is closed, that can still happen. Names can still come out. If you haven't subscribed to the show on audio and video, do it. What are you waiting for? Super easy. We'd love to have you as part of the show regularly. If you're not part of the Locked On College Basketball Discord community, we got a new UConn fan is getting going on some UConn love right now. And so you want to come challenge that or get on board with them. I don't know. That's free to join. The links in the show notes. As always, we want to say apologies to the Lawyer family. Let's go Wildcats, and until Monday. Peace.